Good morning, everybody. It's nice to be with you virtually here on this lovely Tuesday morning on the East Coast. Live from my bedroom today, my venue of choice in this wonderful work from home environment. I'd like to introduce Seth Fox, VP Global Head of Digital Workplace for S&P Global, where Seth is responsible for providing users with a phenomenal digital experience. His focus is to enrich the user's personal productivity, drive effective collaboration across the S&P Global employee base. Value-driven services, innovative technology, and best-in-class delivery are the hallmarks of Seth's mandate to delight the S&P Global employee. Without further ado, Seth, the microphone is yours.
James, thank you very much for that introduction. Many of you are aware of who S&P Global is. For those that are not, we are the world's foremost provider in credit ratings, benchmarks, and analytics in the global capital and commodity markets. I'd like to start by saying that I am probably not alone in noting that these past 10 months have perhaps been the most eventful in my professional career. Today, I'd like to talk a little bit about, we're going to explore 3 simple truths on industry perspectives that are going to lead us into this really great panel discussion on the future of workplace and workforce of the future. So to start, all of us have been impacted in some way by COVID-19 and this pandemic. We've all taken measures to retain some modicum of productivity while ensuring that our workforces and employees were safe and healthy. To say this is unprecedented would be trite. None of us in business, in education, in government, nor any slice of life can really say that they've escaped the change that's associated with this. Each of us have our own personal stories, our own team stories, our own unique stories around this pandemic and this change and this shift. However, there are some commonalities that can be drawn out and shared. There are lessons learned from our peers and colleagues across different enterprises and even different verticals, and that's going to shape a little bit about with the panel discussion here later. So ultimately, our shared response can help drive this common future. The second truth is that we're managing our response in an incredibly complex world. In the majority of cases, the response to the pandemic was tactical. We had to do quite a few things that we really just drove some level of trying to be productive. And these were really based on culture, current state of technology, our business demands, other key factors like supply chain, our own global footprint of the enterprise, our partners, and even in many cases, the jurisdictional challenges such as government lockdowns. Many of us used outsourced IT partners. These partners were also significantly impacted in the countries that they deliver from. So operational support was weakened. In many cases, SLAs were missed. I know that at S&P Global, the supply chain for our end user workstations was severely disrupted for several months. This pushed us to look for creative ways to source. It pushed us to drive to more virtual solutions. Hiring slowed globally in most verticals. And for those new joiners that did come in, they had to do so remotely. Onboarding processes had to be refactored on the fly. Technology roadmaps were put to the test. Many projects went on hold. Some were canceled altogether. Our focus shifted to virtual collaboration just to ensure that our employees stayed connected. Offices, in many cases, were left vacant for weeks and months. Employees left in a rush and in many cases could not even retrieve critical work items or personal belongings that were left behind. As employees began coming back into the office, we had to think about things like sanitation and even testing for Legionnaire's disease, which we had to do in many of the offices where we started coming back. And ultimately, I could probably count the number of businesses who had a business continuity plan for a global pandemic at this scale, which forced everyone to work from their homes on one single hand. I don't know that any of my peers or colleagues had thought this through quite the way it occurred. For our third truth, we've also had to manage non-work related activities while working remotely. I'm guessing many of you recall in 2017 the viral video where the gentleman was giving an interview on the BBC when he was interrupted by his daughter dancing into the room, followed by his son, and then followed by his wife trying to desperately wrangle both. That gentleman's name was Robert Kelly, by the way. At that time, that was a really rare occurrence. But now, how many of us can point to a similar incident that has happened to us over the past 9 to 10 months? So the pandemic didn't just force us to work from home, it forced everyone to work from home, our spouses, our children. And listen, I can tell you that I'm competing for internet bandwidth on a daily basis. So I know throughout the day, I wear many different hats, as I'm sure many of you do. I'm a leader, I'm a parent, I'm a teacher, I'm a coach, and in many cases, I'm tech support for both home and virtual schools. So it can be an extremely demanding role. So let's move over to the data. Because in parallel, we've seen a rise in the threats in the cybersecurity space. Ransomware attacks are 7 times higher already in 2020 than we've seen in all of 2019. This results in many cases in cyber insurance rates increasing, and obviously it increases the demand on our own teams. The FBI reports an increase in cyber complaints of between 300 and 400% since the beginning of the pandemic. In a global survey by Carbon Black, 86% of IT leaders noted that they had discovered cybersecurity gaps in IT operations as a result of the pandemic. It's hard not to when you shift that many employees to working remotely and effectively disrupt your operations, your IT operations completely. So as mentioned, this puts greater pressure on both information security teams as well as technology teams in having to combat this and manage through, right? We've also seen shifts in the way that employees and business leaders view our new way of working. Darren mentioned a lot of the stats that GitLab put together, but we've also seen, based on a recent Market Intelligence 451 research poll, that 78% of employees are welcoming the changes to their new way of working. That includes working remotely, that includes reduced business travel. 80% of enterprises agree that the demands of dealing with COVID-19 actually provide an opportunity to make changes that will benefit the business in the long run. More than half of enterprises agree that inefficiencies exposed by COVID-19 will drive technology investments at their organizations well into the future. 3/4 of respondents to this survey are or will be extending new considerations to staff, most commonly additional flexibility in working hours and locations, and additional support for managers dealing with the need for flexibility. And finally, 47% of respondents say they are likely to reduce their physical office footprint because of the changes caused by the pandemic. All of this culminates into a push to adapt and create our own version of the new normal. Despite some scrambling to move 20,000 employees from office to their homes, S&P Global has sustained reasonable levels of productivity. That said, change continues to occur. We continue to adapt, and the impact of all of this is still not completely clear. However, if you're like us, you've looked at this crisis as an inflection point and an opportunity to redefine the workplace and the workforce. Gartner denotes 3 key phases of the pandemic response: respond, recover, and renew. I think many of us are somewhere in the middle of the recover and renew phases, where we're moving from the identification of capabilities needed to how we're now innovatively and strategically executing on the foundation of a way forward. There is no blueprint on how to transition and create the future of work. That said, what you'll hear from our panelists today, and hopefully shed some light on how enterprises are approaching some of these challenges and what is important to IT executives and business leaders on that journey. So with that, let's get kicked off with our panel discussion. So I think maybe let's start with a round of introductions. And Laura, would you mind kicking us off?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Laura Beucher from Protiviti. I'm an associate director in the technology consulting practice.
Great. Kim?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Kim Curley, and I am the lead for our business readiness consulting practice for NTT DATA Consulting.
Thanks, Kim. Ben?
Hi, Ben Langis, Senior Vice President at State Street Bank, where I am heading up the Global Workplace of the Future effort.
Great. Thanks, Ben. Rex?
Hi, Rex Manseau. I lead our end user compute practice here at Nutanix. So all technologies that impact and improve our ability to work from anywhere. Pleasure to be here today.
Thanks, Rex. And Darren, obviously probably no introduction needed, but thank you for also joining the panel. Great job, incredible information in the earlier session.
Thanks, Seth. Yeah, thanks. Excited to be a part of this panel.
Outstanding. So panelists, let's get started by looking at how the workforce is changing in order to adapt to some of these new ways of working. Kim, would you mind starting us off?
I'd love to. So the things that I'll say really build on some of what you heard from Darren earlier. As you've noted, there's an increase in the focus on humanity in our workforce and in our workplaces, which are now very different than our workplaces used to be. So the messiness of real life, the acceptance of humanity as not always perfect and polished, I think has really risen. Another trend I'm seeing really is a blended work. Well, let me start with the gig economy first. So we're also seeing an increase in the focus on gig workers or people who want to participate in the workforce for certain periods of time and for certain types of work, which is leading us really to the third thing I'm seeing, which is a real increase in the blendedness of the workforce for any given organization. So the old tradition was that you had a large staff of full-time employees and then a variable workforce that might come from consultants or staffing augmentation or whatnot. Now what we're seeing is we're seeing full-time folks, we're seeing contractors, we're seeing consultants, we're seeing temporary workers, and we're also seeing robots. So you've got a very, very blended workforce coming together, really changing the shape of what we see and how we need to adapt for those workforces going forward.
Yeah, for me, it's all about agility, agility, agility. We are in the great agility accelerator. Markets are constantly shifting. Companies must always be ready to pivot to stay relevant. And if we think about business strategies being realized through their workforce, that means our workforce needs to be pivot ready as well. So I'm sending out a recommendation to all HR functions that we really should take a strategic approach to finding ways to quickly and effectively move people to support the changes in our environment.
Yeah, I think, Laura, that's a good point around agility. And I think if you think about how the pandemic has impacted us, it's given us pause and really, thinking around how do we become more agile from an operating model perspective, from a people perspective, and also from a real estate perspective. And that's one of the key things that I am looking at as I've started my new role as head of the Workplace of the Future for State Street 3 weeks ago. And one of those things that we need to be agile about is real estate, to my point earlier, because we know that we've been in a protracted state of working from home. And so we really need to understand what real estate do we need. So that's a footprint perspective and location, but also what design of the real estate will make the employee experience the most optimal, right? So in that journey, what we're doing is taking a personalized approach to that. What I mean by that is doing a persona-based analysis that really articulates and answers the question of why do people come to the office, right? Is it for that social benefit? Is it for their actual role? They need to be in person, or is it because of their role, they're a collaborator, they're a leader, and they're engaging people in person. But we recognize that this is going to be a hybrid solution with work from home and work from the office. So we're actually assigning functions and roles to those respective personas so we can understand that why of people coming into the office. And that's informing many different things for us, right? That's informing, again, the locations of real estate and the number of seats and space we need, but also what is the optimal design? Do we need more collaboration space? Do we need more flexible seating arrangements? And then it also is informing a couple other things. How do we leverage technology to the fullest potential so we can really enhance that employee experience around technology so it's seamless for them in a hybrid work from home and work from office environment? And then thirdly, it's the people aspect of it. It's the culture. Like, what are the answers to those questions that we've asked rhetorically around why they come into the office, and how do we use that to enhance manager training and employee effectiveness? So that's how we're bringing it all together from a persona mapping standpoint as we look to be a little bit more agile, to Laura's point.
Thanks, Ben. Rex, in your role, I'm sure technology plays a really driving factor. What are you seeing in that space?
So we're seeing, every client that we work with, with the very humble objective of giving, employees ideally the ability to consume any application or access any data on any device. And you mentioned earlier the myriad, Seth, of infosec challenges that introduces into the mix. So from an employee perspective, being able to consume everything that I need to get my job done in a natural, intuitive, on-the-go kind of way, as I'm managing life in the new reality, is really a challenge. And I think particularly for the financial services community, the degree of data governance, the secondary concerns about the trade-off between employee productivity and empowerment versus security is a huge one. And it is everywhere, but in particular in the vertical that we're addressing today. So these are necessities, the mother of invention, and it's fantastic to see how companies are innovating and really increasing the pace. What used to be maybe third tier objectives in terms of bring your own device and work from home are now right at the top of the stack in terms of the innovation that's occurring. And it's really inspirational. It's great to be able to help folks with.
Great perspective. Darren, anything to add?
The one thing that I'll add here is the people function is now at the tip of the proverbial spear. So while HR and people functions may have essentially been an administrative type of function in the past, now it's the lead. It is talent branding and employee branding is vital right now. I think the great litmus test going forward is going to be Glassdoor and Comparably reviews for companies that make this transition and they simply allow remote compared to those who support remote. And there's a big difference in allowing something and supporting something. And I think the data will end up telling the tale on which companies truly invest in this. And I think that companies have to be ready for the great democratization of remote work. So every interview now should expect a candidate to ask, what's your stance on workplace flexibility? And every people function will need a great answer to that. In the past, the people who needed that flexibility the most were the least likely to ask for it. People of color, working parents, elder caregivers, military spouses. These people probably weren't very confident and bold in asking for something like that. But going forward, my hope is that all candidates will feel comfortable and bold enough to ask that. And that is one of the outcomes of COVID. I think that it's time that we've democratized that conversation. And people functions, recruiting functions should be ready for that question and work towards having a great answer to it.
That's fantastic, Darren. And it's probably a good segue because we've heard a lot about in the industry in general, leading with empathy. And I think that's been sort of a common theme that we've seen at S&P Global. Kim, you mentioned very specifically the humanity of this change and how we adapt. Maybe we could dive into that a little bit more.
Yeah, I'd love to. And Darren, I love your comment around the democratization of asking for things that make flexible work not only possible, but productive and successful. I think what we're seeing, or starting to see anyway, is, to steal your phrase, a democratization of humanity. Raise your hand if a year ago your company was gung-ho about publishing cooking blogs or hosting virtual yoga sessions, or very accommodating and understanding when your dog barked or your child ran in or the doorbell rang, or the renovations in your household suddenly took on a life of their own in terms of noise. So I think this acceptance of employees as humans first has really made a rapid shift in our business. And I think that's going to have some pretty dramatic long-term effects on how we conduct our business. Darren, you also mentioned people who, in interviews, one of the first things they are going to ask is, tell me about your remote workforce or flexible workforce policies. I think things like that line up really well with what we're seeing in generational shifts and frankly, really mindset shifts, more so than generational shifts, where we have folks who are more focused on the purpose. If I'm going through what I'm going through for COVID and to work and to balance and try to figure out how to do all these things together, my work really needs to mean a lot to me. And my purpose and my values really need to line up with the organization that I am doing these things for and doing these things with. So I think we're going to see a marrying up of some of those technological shifts, which are really driving collaboration methods, collaboration capability. I think you're going to see the rise of corporate use for humanitarian purposes, like virtual yoga classes and ask me anythings, as we heard from GitLab, and all kinds of other things that are really focused on human beings making connections to each other and feeling fulfilled. So I think those are going to be huge. The other thing I think is really big, and again, Darren, I'm going right back to something you said, is the concepts of human capital or human resources as a discipline have shifted in recent decades to be far more administrative. I long for the days when most of our HR professionals were great strategic partners. They still exist, don't get me wrong, and I'm not throwing the whole HR industry under the bus here, but we've in my opinion, overcorrected on the front so that we've decreased some of that strategic partner capability in many of our HR departments. And so as we now think about things like, what did COVID do to business? How do we think about the employee experience, not the way we typically think about it, which is interaction with technology, but the employee's experience with us from hire to retire? And how different is that based on the fact that our workforces are going to be far more variable and far more flexible moving forward? So those are some of the things when I really think about that humanity, and that, I love this, I'm going to totally steal it, Darren, democratization of humanity in the worker world. Those are some of the things I'm really excited about and focused on.
Yeah, when I think about humanity and the concepts that you were just articulating, Kim, which I think were very good, I also think about just leadership from the front, right? Leading by example, leading with empathy. I know it's a buzzword. It's been around for a while. We just haven't really explicitly used it and demonstrated it. But I think through times like this, where there's challenging environments and crises, it's a great opportunity to really flex that leadership muscle around empathy. One of the things that we've done at State Street since the pandemic have had all employee and all manager calls each week with the C-suite, and what that's been able to do is really create a conduit that all employees globally have not had. And we do these at night and for the Asia Pacific region as well, really catering to the needs of the employees. And I think one of the things that's done is not just create that conduit that they may not have had before, but it has provided a level of transparency on what we're doing, and more importantly, why we're doing it. Especially when we started our return to office efforts and really managing this, from February onward. One thing that we were very explicit about, not that we haven't been in the past, we were just very explicit, is that our number one priority is our employees, right? Our employees' safety and our employees' well-being as they matriculate, back to the office, and as we design this workplace of the future. So I think that connection that we've made at the top really demonstrates a level of humanity. It gets everyone on the same plane, if you will, to talk about real issues and priorities, and it provides a level of authenticity, to the employee when we're actually talking about really, challenging subjects or topics that are really driven by the employee. If you think about it, the employee, has all these questions. We need to provide them a means to be able to do that, and they're being answered by the most senior people in the bank, and that has really resonated. And we're going to continue to do that through 2021, because we feel that as we start to design this workplace of the future, it's going to be a critical path for us to be able to communicate what we're doing and why we're doing it. And that authenticity piece is really key, because these are all live Q&As, right? These are on the spot with a few pre-submitted questions. So being able to have that live fire, so to speak, really has resonated, and speaks to addressing that humanity point made earlier.
From a humanity perspective, it's really encouraging and inspirational to see a lot of discussions shifting away from maintaining productivity, which is obviously critical and extremely important, to combating loneliness and isolation in our employees. And I think these events that used to be considered patently unprofessional or unguarded, like the ones that we were describing with the newscaster early on, are actually an opportunity to connect with our coworkers in many cases. Someone is remodeling their kitchen, they have a new puppy, they have a Peloton, what have you, and being able to realize that, particularly for internal discussions, these moments in time when we can connect with a coworker for something other than the task at hand isn't in fact a lowering of our professional standards. It's a replacement for the bonding and the water cooler discussion that are so important. And it's really a long-term investment in our mental health. That's not going to be the reactive, stay productive, but the long-term investment in our connection to the culture of the company and our coworkers. So I just see so much more of that, and I think hopefully that's something that sticks around after we return to whatever normal is, whenever we do that.
Laura, any thoughts?
Sure, yeah. One thing that I've been thinking about is career pathing and how far away that seems, waiting for an opportunity to operate at the next level when a certain job is available for you to apply for. I think with the accelerated digital transformation, it's happening right now. We're upskilling and reskilling every day. We're career stepping, maybe, to constantly adjust to our environments. And some of the new skills that are required for this future workforce are adaptability, agility, and resiliency. Employers are expecting us to perform at that next level right now with these skills. So I think it's a great opportunity for employees to prove themselves, to accelerate to the next level using these new skills of adaptability, agility, and resiliency.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So as we think about shifting in this mode where we're putting employees' well-being at the forefront of how we approach things, what does this mean with regard to how we work in the office and how we work out of the office? Ben, would you mind starting us off? I'd love your perspective on this.
Yeah, sure. I think not to revert back to the real estate piece, but I think that if you think about this hybrid model that we have to, or we will have to operate in as a part of our future state design, we need to be understanding of what's driving the employees' priorities and their sentiment. And so if you think about the well-being aspect, there's multiple aspects to this, and there's different ends of the spectrum where you have people that want to work from home because that works for them. and they have a suitable office or workspace that they can work in effectively and optimally, but others don't, right? So we need to be mindful of that as we build the future. So one of the things that we're thinking about, even during the pandemic, is really thinking through how we operate a flexible space arrangement where those people who may be going through mental health issues or just challenging environments at home have the ability to go in and be productive, and in some cases, run into a colleague in the limited, few people we have in the office, and start to create that esprit de corps that we're so used to of being fully in the office. The other aspect of this is really catering to that need of working from home, where people may not have that fully optimal environment, as I mentioned before, and they still want to operate in that hybrid environment, have that flex space at work, but also being able to be effective at home. So we're really thinking through what are the things that people need from technology perspective, collaboration tool perspective, and really taking a holistic approach by those personas that I mentioned earlier to really create a fit for purpose solution for different functions and different roles, so that people have a kit, if you will, to be able to work from home. These are some of the things that we're thinking about, but these are some of the things that I think are requisite to or a prerequisite to the design of the workplace of the future, because people's situations are different. And we're not going to solve every single situation, but I think that there's a level of flexibility and a fit for purpose type of design approach that we're going to employ that has an impact on optimal real estate design, optimal real estate footprint, a seamless technology experience for the employee in and out of the office, and then equally as important, being able to equip them with tools and demonstrating or defining those behaviors that we look to see, because the workplace of the future is going to look very different from a manager perspective post-COVID than it did pre-COVID. So we need to prepare them for that with the requisite tools to get there.
Darren, you touched on some of these themes in your presentation. You want to expand on any of those?
Yeah, I think we're at the end of the office mentality, and I want to double click on that point, which it's not necessarily the end of the office, it's the end of the office mentality. And part and parcel with that is, while many people are framing this as the future of work discussion, really it's a future of living discussion. So companies are being forced to make work without a physical presence there. You can't use the building as the crutch. Your infrastructure, your workflows, your processes, even your culture have to work regardless of where someone is. Because going forward, there's really no guarantee that anyone is going to be seated in one specific seat from day to day across your entire organization. So this is the great decoupling of driving results as a business and geography. And there's a lot of things to unwind and unpack and rebuild. But many of the things that have made the office mentality such a mainstay, things like being the loudest voice in the room, office politics, what you wear, who visibly shows up first and leaves last, much of these things have nothing to do with driving business results. And so many praises and promotions have been based on this type of overview. And it definitely negatively impacts introverts, women, people of color, those that don't fit the quote unquote mold. So going back to the democratization of this, it's a lot harder to have office politics remotely. It's just awkward, which is a great thing for people in mass. It allows us to just focus on the work, focus on each other as people, get our work done as efficiently as possible, and then go engage with our neighbors and community that we're now able to be closer to. So I hope long-term the office mentality is the thing that goes away, and then we find really awesome and creative ways to use office space. I've even spoken with some leaders who are concerned about having hundreds of thousands of square footage in office buildings that quote unquote unused. And I say, well, you could turn that into an internship center, and for underserved youth in the community, now they have a safe place to go and learn. And it becomes a marketing and branding play for the company. And also you're giving back to the community that supports you in many other ways. People are very nimble, they're very adaptable, they're very agile. I think real estate going forward will have a lot more opportunity to serve companies, even if people don't come there day to day. At the core, a company's headquarters can no longer be the epicenter of power or decision making. People shouldn't go to the office to brush shoulders or advance their career. They should go there because they just like working there for occasions. Maybe they don't have a home that's big enough to really support remote work, or they choose to live in a place where they don't have high-speed broadband. But the culture around that, why people go to the office, it shouldn't be tied to the office mentality. Long term, I do think we're going to see that shifting.
Yeah. Thanks, Darren. Rex, anything to add there? Rex, I think you're on mute.
Clever. There we go. Yeah, I think hopefully the purposeful and thoughtful divestiture in office space gives us the ability to reinvest in our employees, and just things such as I see that our company has given each employee an allowance to buy a proper chair, not have the dining room chair with to sit on and ruin your back, right? It's also from an investment in employee talent. It's really broadened the geography where we're able to source talent. No longer, for instance, is Nutanix as bound to individuals who reside in the Silicon Valley. Very talented, very expensive workforce, and it's opened up other markets for us to have some really, really talented people who prefer to work remotely and who can join the team. And so I think it's just sent us in a lot of different directions in terms of how we can reinvest that money that was in the mothership previously.
Yeah, and Seth, I'll jump in there too. And Rex, I love what you said. Not only has it opened up opportunities for the companies to access new pools of talent, which I know will lead to increase in diversity, not only in specific representation, but in the way we solve problems and in the solutions and products and new things, the new innovations that we come up with. It will really force us where we may have said, I've looked in all the normal places and I can't find a diverse slate of candidates. We really don't have that excuse anymore. So it's opened up opportunities for organizations to really look much more broadly and not be bound by an artificial geographic fence, if you will. But it's also done the flip side. It's opened up opportunities for people who, for all kinds of good reasons, don't live next door to the company headquarters. Now they have opportunities to be just as close to the company's centers of power, if you will, as anyone else, which then begs the question, why do I live where I live? What is it about where I live that anchors me to this specific geography? And taking that even a step further, and this doesn't apply to everybody because not everybody is fortunate enough to have a lot of to have the same options that some of us do around our physical home location. But why did I pick the size home that I did? Why did I design my renovations in the way that I did? Why do I have X amount of space versus X minus 2 or X times 2 amount of space? So it really gives everybody this opportunity to rethink and express themselves in different ways. So where we've had some very consistent definitions of, to Laura's point, career progression, career pathing, and definitions of success, now going back to that humanity angle, we have the opportunity to redefine success for the employee and the human in a pretty different way, because we've removed a lot of what we now recognize as artificial barriers, but seemed very real and very ingrained for the last, numbers and numbers of decades. So I'm really fascinated to see how we'll see people move and shift, particularly as it gets safer and safer to do so.
Yeah, I think that's so critical as a second order effect. People are going to be optimizing their life for living, not for work. They'll look at things like air quality, access to nature. They'll choose where they want to be based on where they want to be, not where they have to be for a commutable distance to work. And for many people right now who are struggling with this, they think, I don't love remote work. It's largely because they're currently living and residing in a place that was optimized for where they needed to be for work, not necessarily where they needed to be for living. So once those leases expire, you get a bit of breathing room. You can really think through what your future is and kind of re-optimize for that. The longer term impacts of that are very positive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've all heard this analogy about how we're in the same storm, but not in the same boat, and our perceptions and needs are completely different. Well, I would say even just working from home, we're all in these different boats, and boats are thrashing, and some are in calmer waters as we work from home. So employees, really don't take your companies for granted and the support that they're providing you to be at home. And be gracious about the empathy that they have as you're working through, your boat in those waters. And lastly, I'd recognize that we have already proven that we're a really resilient people in the storm, and that resiliency now will be the fabric of a workforce and a workplace and its environment moving forward.
Yeah, those are great perspectives, and it just makes me think. Wondering what the broadband performance is like in Fiji. If we're thinking about where we work in our offices. Just a quick pause for everyone who is attending. We do have the opportunity to ask questions of our panelists. If you can click on the QR code and go to Slido, you can ask questions directly to the panelists. We'll get to those momentarily. So let's move on. We haven't really touched on the theme of technology, but I think it's a good pivot point. We all believe that technology is certainly a key enabler of our shift into this next normal. So what are the panelists seeing emerge, and maybe what are the investments that you're making in this area? Rex, you want to kick us off here?
Sure. This definitely, a fertile ground. I think, giving employees, first of all, the ability to, consume any application or data on any endpoint device in an extremely flexible manner is incredibly liberating. It really lets, and it'll be a productivity gain that's felt long after the current crisis passes, right? So I think also just, plowing some of that savings that we've seen from like travel and entertainment and all of these things that were maybe superfluous to productivity back into enabling technology is really, really, refreshing to see. And so I think that, to think if we think of the things that we're doing on, our 3 different devices and in terms of connecting to each other, to clients, to contractors, I think it's really inspirational. And I think in most cases, companies are finding that even repurposing, a fraction of the savings in capital from this back into technology is paying so many dividends for them.
Yeah,
Laura, do you have any thoughts on this?
At Protiviti, we've been working with our parent company, Robert Half Staffing, for a while, and we've been investing heavily in data science and AI just to better understand and predict the needs of having a truly flexible staffing model that enables workforce agility. And we recognize that our clients need help, especially in this digital world that we're living in, to better understand their workforce. And we've built technology that allows our clients to accelerate the required workforce planning, workforce management, and decision-making that's required, along with helping them report on human capital management disclosures, as it's considered a key driver of a company's value.
Yeah, and I think as we move to this workplace or living, I don't know how Darren rephrased it, but I like his approach there. But I think that as we design this, the initial thought was probably work from home, right? And we need to have a technology solution to be able to support that. But now it's work from anywhere, right? So you really need to be able to provide a seamless employee experience from a technology perspective, and not just from a technology perspective. To the point made earlier, I think by Kim, it's really an entire experience. But I do think that technology, as you look at means of collaborating more effectively and being present, technology is a long pole in the tent, so to speak. So if you think about means of being able to replace those things that we really look for in the office or in person, that social benefit, if you will, that spontaneous creativity, we need to be able to replace those to the extent that we can through technology with collaboration tools, again, that are fit for purpose. And that's what we're working on right now, making sure we have the right tools for the right for the right need, for the right type of worker throughout the bank, and being able to understand how we interact with clients more effectively and internally. So again, that technology piece, it has, I think, two different components. It's creating that seamless and kind of stitched together, if you will, experience for the employee, and understanding whether we do, VDI or a virtual desktop versus a laptop solution. Figuring all that stuff out is one thing, but also leveraging technology and artificial intelligence to be able to understand the how and the why of the work is critically important. So we're taking a look at tools right now that aren't looking to assess capacity and try to wring out more productivity. It's more around how are we interacting with each other right now in this COVID state, and how do we actually maximize and optimize that level of interaction and collaboration that we're doing right now in a virtual environment, right? And then I think what we do need to figure out is how do we maximize that when we have people in the office and out of the office, and making that hybrid model work. Because one of the things I think that we need to need to figure out fast, especially as we move to that hybrid model, is making sure that the person or people that are not maybe in the office are inclusive, are included, and we make them present in the dialogue, in the collaboration. And I think technology is a great means to do that. So I think that one aspect is the actual fit for purpose solution to make it seamless for the employee. But I think maximizing artificial intelligence and information and data, and leading solutions with data, is going to be critical in understanding how and why we do the work more effectively.
Yeah, Ben, some great points. And, I love this and have been thinking a lot about this concept of fit for purpose. We live in an era where we generally don't we generally don't teach people how to use new tools. So if you get a new phone, somebody just hands you the new phone, gives you 3 bullet points on how to turn it on, hit this button, wait X number of seconds, and everything will automatically work. When we push out tools in the workplace, very often we're pushing out what could be very advanced technology and collaboration tools to people who, until February or March of this year, had never logged in remotely to anything in their lifetimes. So the whole concept of what is technology and how is it fit for purpose, and how do you put those pieces together so that you create the most effective organization that you can, has a lot to do with where you're starting and where you're headed. As a consultancy, we work with a lot of different clients, and many of our clients have very stringent rules about physically where we as consultants work on their behalf. Well, all of that just went out the window, because not only can the consultants not be in the specific space, their employees can't be in the specific space. So all of that's been thrown out. So our clients are asking, when do I use Teams versus SharePoint versus does it make sense for me to implement Slack, or what do I do about, and simply providing a basket of all of these tools to your workforce doesn't get the job done, right? It doesn't help start from where you are and build to where you want to be. And I think the concept of fit for purpose is far more unique to culture and unique to working style, particularly now, than folks give it credit for. I think over time, we'll see some of those significant differences smooth out where the starting points are far enough in the past that less and less of that is maybe as critical. I don't know. We'll see how that goes over time. But using that technology and repurposing technology from other spaces to help increase the effectiveness of your organization is going to be critical. You need to reuse those investments that you've made. So at NTT, one of the things that we are working on is we've developed a great deal of technology, particularly for our public sector clients. Think cities, municipalities, groups like that, to increase public safety. So they may be tapping into multiple different data feeds and pulling information to understand where traffic is moving so it can better control traffic lights, where there might be sudden spikes in concentration of people so that they understand there may be a problem in a particular area. Well, how can we use, how can we use those algorithms and those methods of gathering and analyzing data to help us run our offices better and to help us understand how collaboration is working, to Ben said, in those hybrid environments where you've got some people in the office, but a whole lot of people who are working from anywhere. How do you use that data to bring it together to understand what's really going on and how best you can support that organizational effectiveness or that experience over time? So I think there's still a good bit of evolution to come. I think there's some great tools out there. I think as usually happens with technology, is there's a whole bunch of new tools in a particular space, and everybody tries them and they shake out a little bit, and sort of the cream rises to the top, and then you end up with significantly greater saturation of implementation of those greater tools. But fit for purpose is going to continue to be really, really important, I think.
So Kim, I really like the fit for purpose aspect of this. One tool that we know has been fit for purpose is Zoom. I know that I'm on calls oftentimes from 7 to 7, and it's just nonstop, right? So how are you guys thinking about combating Zoom fatigue? I know we hear about this quite a bit. Darren, would love to hear your perspective, since you've been remote for an extended period of time. So I'm assuming that you've mastered this.
Yeah, well, we do what we can. So Zoom fatigue is real. It largely stems from the skeuomorphism that we're seeing, which is copying the office environment and trying to paste it into a virtual environment without questioning if anything can or should be done differently. So if you had a series of recurring meetings at a boardroom in an office, you would simply port those over to a Zoom URL without stopping to ask, number one, does this need to happen? Number two, should we go about this any differently? For example, should we change our meeting hygiene and actually document what's happening so that all of this information doesn't just happen in a vacuum and has no transparency to anyone else? And then lastly, are there any tools that we can leverage to get better at this? So instead of just managing the status quo, to Ben's point earlier, let's leverage tools and technologies to do things different. It is astonishing to me that it took a global pandemic for us to leverage the internet to free society to work from anywhere. I mean, I'll take it, but it is kind of a baffling thing when you think of how long broadband has been around and how many roles can be done from anywhere. And it took this jarring moment for us to actually take advantage of the thing that humans created. So when it comes to tools and Zoom fatigue, just take a hard look at what is actually needed in a meeting. Status updates, you don't need a meeting for. You can write this down. At GitLab, the core thing we think about here is separating consensus gathering from decision making. Many organizations merge these into one. So you have an hour-long meeting where you try to persuade enough people to generally vote in one direction, and then a decision is made. But it is much more efficient to separate those two, and you actually get much more perspective and a much more inclusive array of voices in that perspective if you separate the two. So at GitLab, we try to gather consensus and have feedback on things asynchronously by writing it down in a GitLab issue, asking for feedback, time boxing that feedback. So we say we give the whole org a week to provide feedback, and then just have one single meeting at the end of it to actually make the decision based on all of the feedback that was gathered. So in that one instance, if you scale that across an entire organization, you're already saving hundreds, if not thousands, of meeting hours a week. And it's just pausing and taking a hard look at, is the meeting necessary and is there a better way to do it? We recently wrapped up an Async 3.0 initiative where we made public how all of our various teams were using asynchronous workflows to avoid meetings. We have one engineering team in particular that actually visibly celebrates in Slack every time a meeting is canceled. It is something that has to be celebrated. It becomes a part of the culture that if you work hard to make work possible without a meeting, that's worth celebrating. And I think most organizations are a long ways from getting there, but hopefully this provides some insight on what it takes to actually get there. And the last thing I'll mention here is Zoom fatigue in meetings. We generally look at the thing, the medium, but when you reframe it as being respectful of others' time, it changes the narrative completely. So every time that we can use a different, more advanced workflow to avoid a meeting, you are being much more respectful of a given person's time. You're allowing them to prioritize life, their sleep, whatever it may be, wherever they may be in the world, over work and do work on their terms. That is an incredible sign of respect. So when you frame this as, look, we're working towards making fewer meetings because it shows greater respect for our team members, that's something that's a lot more easy to rally around versus, hey, is there another tool that we can use to replace all of these meetings?
Kim, any thoughts on that to build off what Darren said?
You're right. I have never looked at myself so much as I have in the last however many umpteen months. It seems like, I mean, truly, and now here we do all this primping and preparing for Zoom meetings. And, I made sure I had colors on that made me look good today because I was going to be in front of a camera. And, the whole concept of what do you wear to work and how much makeup do you wear? Do you wear any or do you not? It really calls into question a lot of these things back to where do you live? Why do you live there? And all that. So Zoom fatigue can be a combination of a number of things. It's not just that you're physically present and you're trying to pay attention, because the act of paying attention in a visual way is pretty different than the act of paying attention just through your ears. So Zoom fatigue really comes from a number of ways. Darren's exactly right. For the vast majority of meetings, all we did was switch them from the conference room down the hall to a Zoom URL. You're exactly right. That's exactly what we did. And we didn't even think about it. But what we forgot is, we used to accomplish a lot with really easy and simple hallway conversations that didn't require the level of energy that the in-person interactions that's facilitated by Zoom necessitates as well. So I know this is going to sound crazy, but one of the things that I've started doing lately is using this thing that we call a phone actually as a phone. And I think that use of that device as a phone is now, I don't know, number 8 or 9 or 10 on the list of functions that we use those devices for. Now, we still call them phones, but that's not how we use them. So lately, what I've been trying to do is make sure that I not Teams call somebody, because that anchors somebody to the most part to their office setup that is now set up the way they want to. Because, for me, I've got my monitors and everything set up. And so I forget that I'm on a laptop and that's movable and I could go in the backyard if I wanted to, because now I'm so used to this setup that I've created with my standing desk and everything. So I've started trying to use the phone as an actual phone. Pick up the phone, call somebody, have a conversation. It gives you the ability to, walk across the street or get a breath of fresh air, or simply move or stretch your back, or sit on the floor and stretch while you're having a conversation. I'm pretty certain it doesn't decrease the overall effectiveness of that conversation, but it certainly increases the energy that I have left coming out of that conversation. And I think that's true for others as well. I'm not Not everybody is like that. Lots of people get tons of energy out of Zoom calls, and I think that's awesome. I used to be one of those as well, and now I'm getting to the point where I really need some non-FaceTime with people, and using that phone as a phone is one of the ways that I and others in my company are trying to change that a bit.
Yeah, I think, Seth, the problem with Zoom is it's fit for all purposes, or at least that's the way people view it, right? So that's the conundrum that we're trying to figure out. To Kim's point, I think if there's kind of a few things that I'd like to highlight that I think we found to be initially effective, and we want to pressure test some of these things, but. Yeah, and I think Rex, you had mentioned before, but or Darren, it was be thoughtful and purposeful, right? It's critically important that I'm not even saying schedule a meeting, initiate an interaction to solve a problem or to build a relationship. Be thoughtful and purposeful around who you're engaging, why. And it gets back to that piece around what Darren was saying around the respect factor. If you're thoughtful and purposeful with your time and the time with others, you're going to be more productive. And I think you're going to build better relationships because those relationships will be predicated on meaningful interactions, which is critical during this time. The other aspect that we're taking a look at is given the Zoom fatigue, and I think part of the Zoom fatigue is literally these incessant. It seems like one incessant meeting lasting 10 to 14 to 16 hours a day. You have no time in between, right? And I think that what we're experiencing is some of these aspects of Outlook as a default, right? Have 30 minutes. You double click in there and it automatically defaults to 30. But what if it defaulted to 25, right? So it gives you 5 minutes to prep, freshen up, and get your mind straight of being present in that next meeting, right? And the same thing for an hour meeting, right? To 50 minutes. And that doesn't preclude you from making it a full hour if you need it, but it at least starts to create the behavior by default of adding a buffer in so that you can refresh mentally, physically, and really hit that next engagement in a meaningful way, right? And the third thing is be creative, right? So I've had many different types of meetings. I've had Peloton meetings, where we're all on our Pelotons. I've had meetings where we're running socially distant with people for an hour, and we get a workout in, and we actually get a lot accomplished. So obviously that's limited, during COVID with some of those interactions. But be creative. It doesn't necessarily all need to be to the point Kim made around moving from the boardroom to just a virtual environment. And that virtual environment can be many different things, and I think that that's one aspect to keep it fresh, keep your employees engaged, and also give them a little bit of autonomy too of how they want to have these interactions in a hybrid environment.
So at Protiviti, very early on in the pandemic, we wrote a blog about leading teams in times of uncertainty. And it's kind of funny to look back and see how it still really applies. But one of the things that they stated was optimize your home space, right? Like make sure you have a clean desk and a clean mind to operate. I was able to purchase a standing desk very early on. Not only did it help my back pain, it helped my morale as well. I think my mood was just lifted. I didn't feel like I was sitting at a desk all day long. So that was one item. Another item from that blog post was narrowing the planning window in uncertainty, which I really like. So we're not doing as much as long-term planning, long meetings, going through every I dotted and T crossed. We're taking opportunities to inspect and adapt when we're planning so that we can course correct based on the conditions on the ground. So I think that narrowing the planning window really helps too with the Zoom fatigue. And then the last one we had in this blog post was replace your water cooler conversations and stay connected and engaged. So I think we actually have water cooler conversations at home as well. Not just in the office. There's things we need to check up on, maybe, respond to a text from a loved one, get some coffee, get some water. So something that happened very organically at Protiviti is that we reduced 30-minute meetings to 20 minutes, and then we reduced 60-minute meetings to 50 minutes to allow that transition in between meetings and that 10 minutes to get yourself together and have a water cooler conversation, whether it's at home or at work. And I will note, Efficiency has definitely not suffered from these shorter meetings. I think efficiency went through the roof.
So I think, sorry, Rex, I would just I'll note this, and then I would love to get your thoughts on it, actually. We've talked about Zoom, and this is not an indictment on Zoom, but you can't segue there without thinking about Zoom bombing, and the risks now of some of these things happening with this new way of working. So we all know that things have changed. I provided some data around that earlier. What keeps you up at night from a risk or threat standpoint? Rex, you mentioned data governance. So would love to maybe hear your thoughts on that or other ideas.
Right. So from an availability of information and a productivity perspective, fine folks, architecting a secure solution for the employee who is giddy and delighted to just consume a Windows application on their iPad is pretty easy. That's not going to, challenge an InfoSec team terribly. But let's think about, what do you do with the trader from an information security perspective? You have, an employee who's dealing with incredibly sensitive information, who needs 6 monitors, who needs split-second responsiveness. And how do you replicate in a secure way, something that is really, really sensitive in terms of employee data or customer intellectual property, or transactional information? How do you? And that's really it's forced a lot of innovation, and it's really, really pushed companies from all sorts of verticals in terms of how they're going to do this. What are the trade-offs between employee empowerment and productivity and information security? And it's I think that will be much more advanced towards our goals of InfoSec coming out of this than we were going into them from a remote work perspective.
Laura, what are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So I would say that, we talk about resiliency and business continuity management and technology, but we really need to think about resiliency in our people and having that staffing nimbleness to respond to ever-changing business needs. But also the biggest risk there is maintaining and redefining the culture, right? And in a heavily remote workforce, how do we go about that? We're providing the tools, but where's the culture? How do we temperature check our culture? Recently, Protiviti did an after action report with SIFMA to talk about, post-pandemic, what we learned. And I wanted to share something with you. One of the key takeaways was that health and wellness of the workforce should be a paramount consideration in the form of risk management structures, even of organizations, alongside enterprise, operational, financial, and IT risks. So SIFMA is actually even telling us health and wellness of the workforce is very important.
Yeah, I'll jump in on that too. That resilience not only applies to sort of general skill sets, but even when you're using a technology and something goes bump in the night, none of us want that to happen. We all design secure solutions so it doesn't happen. But there are circumstances where something goes bump in the night. Ensuring that your individuals who are around that scenario know how to deal with something that goes bump in the night, know how to either shut down or protect or erect boundaries or whatever needs to be done sort of in the moment to create that risk barrier, I think is really important too. So again, back to, we're giving people tools. Are we teaching them the right ways to use them and giving them enough knowledge so that they're capable of protecting the workforce if something goes bump in the night, which none of us want to have happen, and we all try very hard to ensure it doesn't happen. And then, Laura, I'd just go back to, my people in my office's joke that my tagline is, it's all about the people. It always has been, and it always will be. And I think the results of this after action report show that we need to shift our thinking, because in fact, for most of us in the financial services industries and others, our primary product is the knowledge capital and the intellectual capital walking around between the ears of our most accomplished and most valuable employees. And that is a risk. We need them to be healthy. We need them to be productive. We need them to be, in a place where, they can thrive and contribute back to the organization what they're capable of doing, and that we as an organization can support them in that particular way. So, I love when I get proof points about it's all about the people. It always has been and always will be. So I'm going to steal that, Laura. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
No problem.
It gets us back to, how are we creating that resilience in the humanity? How are we creating risk protection around our humans?
Correct.
Yeah, that's a good point. And the one thing outside of the threat landscape from a cyber perspective, and we're taking a look at that through that persona analysis that I made mention to before, but also BCP. Like BCP takes on a whole new lens when you look at our current operating environment. It used to be to one angle you could look through is BCP was if something happened to the building that we work in, how do we actually facilitate a work from home strategy? Well, now everyone's working from home. So how do we actually understand things like in the Northeast and other parts of the country heading into winter? How does a snowstorm and a power outage impact our ability to be productive? And what does that do when we look at our optimized footprint from a real estate perspective and making sure that we have the ability to bring those people in if we needed to, for them to do the work as we design that future workplace. So there's a lot of different components to risk. So I think it's overall resiliency to the points made earlier, but it's also thinking through that as we make all these changes to the workforce, the technology, and the workplace, meaning the real estate footprint, we always have to put this BCP lens on top of that to make sure that we're not that we're ready. So there's a level of vigilance there, but it's strategic vigilance in how we're going to operate going forward.
Thanks, Ben. Hey, Darren, I'm sure again in your role you've got to also think about risk along with the experience of remote work. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I can look at risk in two ways. One is the bump in the night that was mentioned earlier, and then I think the more systemic risk is the risk of burnout in an organization if you let this linger too long without putting intentionality around the workflows and belonging and inclusivity and all of those things that go with it. And for the first part, it really comes back to GitLab being adamant about working handbook first. So a lot of companies will toss out the notion of documentation. It's very important to write things down and document, which is true, but it's very important to work handbook first because this means you are documenting in a systemic way where everything is in a single source of truth. You don't want your legal team documenting in one place and your finance team documenting in another place and your engineering and security teams documenting in another place. When you write things down, you provide visibility to the maximum amount of people in the organization. And when you write things down like troubleshooting or what to do in the event of a security breach, when these things are written down, there's less panic, there's less anxiety. People can turn to a dedicated place and understand what has happened in the past and what the protocols are going forward. And this is a massive risk mitigation for the company. If you write it down, it enables more people to act on it regardless of who's awake or who's online or time zones or anything like that. And for a lot of organizations where these processes were kind of tucked away in the back parts of individual people's minds, this is really exposing how risky that always was. When you need a certain person there to verbalize something over and over, that is an incredible risk to the company. You want to write down as much of it as possible so that you remove that single point of failure risk, regardless of whether we're talking about high impact security or legal or finance or marketing or communications. All of these things kind of tie back to that thought of writing things down so that you reduce the risk of people leaving or someone not being available or someone forgetting or knowledge decaying over time. And we can talk about this further, but on the burnout and mental health standpoint, it's a very, very real issue, and it's only getting worse. I think we were all a bit prepared to manage through 3 to 6 months of this. Now that it looks like we may go a whole another year on this, companies are having to get creative on just providing a relief valve. And we mentioned building culture, but a lot of companies are trying to look introspectively of how many virtual happy hours can I stand up? And I'm not sure that's the right approach. A better approach is, instead of asking someone to hang around for another hour on Friday, to do another Zoom call with people you've seen all week. I know this sounds a bit paradoxical, but free them to go be the hands and feet of their community. Put a mask on, go find something that's meaningful to you, and get away from work. And what we see is that collectively, if you take an entire organization and you free up 1 hour on a Friday to go do something that matters to them and their community, instead of being on a virtual happy hour, that is an amazing amount of change that your organization is helping to proliferate. And then if you encourage people to take photos and videos and stories of that, and then share that back on a Monday stand-up, for example, in Slack or Teams, that is how you build culture. And so I know this sounds paradoxical, but in a remote setting, a lot of workplace culture is built outside of work. We just need leaders that will trust people and empower people to go be who they are in the world and then share that back. It's much more genuine and authentic than a conversation about the weather or sports. Nothing against the weather or sports. My Braves didn't make it to the World Series this year, and I'm very disappointed about that. But you know what I'm saying? It's a different way of thinking about where is culture built. And it's worth recognizing that during a pandemic, culture is much less about company rah-rah and more about just being there for other people when they're going through whatever it is they're going through. So the baseline is definitely changed for culture during a pandemic. And if you just hold steady and be there for each other now, it will put you in a great position to really accelerate what that culture is coming out on the other side of COVID.
That's great. Thanks for the perspective, Darren. We've got a few questions that are coming in, and I thought, since we're sort of centered around this notion of risk, we could highlight this first question to all the panelists. Any thoughts on supporting printing at home versus data leakage? Interestingly enough, despite my big honking printer in the background, I don't think that I've actually printed anything for work while I've been remote. So would love that perspective. Anyone?
I think adopting the right technology.
Don't do it.
It kills trees.
Sorry, Rex. I think there's two things here. One, I think there's a great opportunity for corporate America to say, to do an environmental thing and say, stop killing trees. So, that's one aspect of it. I think the other aspect of it is, and I am the prime example. I was very paper driven, review everything in paper, take paper decks to meetings, memos, etc. And I haven't printed anything for 9 months. So if I can do it, certainly others can do it. But I think it's really, there's certain requirements, right? Wet signatures for legal contracts, even that's going away to a certain extent, but regulatory documents. So there's going to be always a small need, but I think there's a great opportunity for us to, to have a call to action, not just within your own company, but across industries. And Rex, I didn't mean to cut you off. Apologies.
Not at all, and I do admire your flexibility and your conservationist perspective on that. Just saying, many companies are also realizing that that's a thing can be enabled or disabled for segments of your workforce, which is good. The other is what are you really saving? I mean, if a cell phone screenshot of taking a picture of the screen can be equally damaging, and where's the line, right? So just some of those practical concerns should come into play when you're thinking about that as well.
Yeah, the one thing I'd add is some of this goes back to, again, are you enabling people to use the tools that they have at their disposal most effectively? So, are people using OneNote to take notes and connect that to their meetings instead of the physical book that they were carrying around? Are they using DocuSign or other, electronic, and I'm not plugging any of these tools, but, have we helped people understand how they can use those tools? I too made a shift away from paper, not actually a little bit before that. Mine was really driven by the fact that I was traveling all the time, and paper's heavy and you don't want to carry the paper. Of course, that problem of mine has gone out the window. But because I was able to change that habit and learn how to use alternative tools better, I didn't feel the need to go back to paper as much. So some of this may be helping people understand, in what circumstances do you really need to print? Where are those risk elements? And then supporting people through again, it's a change, right? And probably a change they didn't ask for. So how do you support people through that change?
Kim, I agree. My previous company, we did not use paper, and it was a mindset shift. And at the end, I felt really good about reducing waste in process, in the environment. It can happen. I too encourage reduce your reliance on paper products.
Thanks, all. We've got another question that's come in. What are your thoughts of impact of work from home on team creativity, innovation, and why, and which would rely on in-person collaboration specifically? So open that up to the group.
I definitely miss whiteboards, walking up to a physical whiteboard and working with someone, erasing, drawing. We've been trying to emulate that with mural boards, and again, getting more used to using these digital sticky notes and dropping in images. It's a culture shift, but we've been very effective at doing design thinking sessions and innovation working sessions using a digital whiteboarding solution.
Yeah, I echo Laura on that. Those tools like Mural, it requires a culture shift. You're learning a new tool, and as Kim mentioned earlier, training should be involved. Just throwing drastically new tools into the workforce without proper training on how to make the shift is going to create additional chaos and friction. So the tool plus training will help you unlock the minds of this. This actually can be better. It can be more efficient. It can be more effective. It can be more inclusive. It's a different way of doing it. And ideally, you leverage it to the point that people who do choose to go into the office still open up their laptop and use Mural. They're just using it from the office instead of home. And that's the mental shift of being remote first and really taking the power away from the seat and putting the power into the work. Two things I'll mention here. I've heard people say that they miss those hallway conversations where innovation is born. So you're walking by someone in the hallway, just the sight of them conjures a thought. You verbalize 2 sentences to them. You begin jamming on this and you start incubating this idea. The same thing can happen remotely. If you see someone's name in Slack or Teams, conjures up an idea, or even if you go back to the office and this happens, instead of verbalizing it to the person, just grab them by the arm, go back to your desk and type the 2 sentences that you were about to verbalize. What happens here is that now you can get incubation, feedback, and innovation from your entire team instead of just the one person. So now all of a sudden, your feedback loop and your incubation can happen much more quickly and much more rapidly with a much more diverse array of perspectives pouring into that. So again, this goes back to looking at the opportunity versus the scarcity. A lot of people say, I miss those serendipitous conversations. But when you say that the other way around, that was your company's innovation really hinging on how many people serendipitously ran into each other? Imagine getting on a quarterly earnings call and an analyst asked you, so what's next quarter look like? And you answered, well, I don't know. We'll see how many people walk past each other in the hallways. Probably wasn't a great way to spur innovation to begin with. And remote forces you to be more intentional about forming those moments, formalizing those moments, and inviting as many people as possible to help incubate that. One thing I'll say in closing here, in-person engagement matters a lot. You should not be trying to solve for having your organization never meet each other in person ever again. There's tons of value in strategic offsites and strategy and planning sessions and getting core teams together quarterly or biannually, getting your whole team together every year. At GitLab, we do this. It's a summit called GitLab Contribute. In-person matters a lot. And even in a remote setting, make sure that you set aside budget to get people together. You don't need to see people every day in the same office, but it is awesome to see people on occasion. And it's amazing how much rapport can be built with a week together. It can buy you a lot of time kind of until we meet again, maybe in 6 or 12 months, but it's worth investing in. It's worth planning for, even if you can't travel right now. People very much appreciate the IOU, especially new hires who are onboarding right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that too, I think, Darren, you just brought up a couple of good points that I was going to mention. I think you're never going to replace the in-person, value of building relationships. However, to your point, if you do those, strategically and intentionally, I think that they're even more valuable once you tee those up. So I think that they shouldn't be a variable that we just throw out of the equation. They just may serve a different purpose in the way that we approach them and engage people going forward. Secondly, the point raised around the velocity, what I'll call the velocity of innovation, right? So having that incubation session with somebody in a room, whiteboarding with a few people is great. But what ends up happening? Hey, this is a great idea. Let's get a meeting together with the other people, and then you start to see this series of events that one meeting leads to another and slows down the innovation. Whereas you can use these collaboration tools like Teams and other to actually increase the velocity of that innovation when you actually do that in a more online, collaborative, and virtual environment, to Darren's point earlier. So I think velocity is key when you look at this, and being intentional is also another aspect of really meaningful engagements.
Yeah, I think I know the one thing I personally am struggling with and our teams are struggling with is trying to have a foot in each canoe. You can't have meetings all day long and be expected to sort of spontaneously interact and contribute in collaborative tools as well, because now you've just said I need to work 20 hours a day instead of because I need to do all the interaction on my meetings, and then I need to go in and do all my interaction on Slack or Teams or whatever. And so having it being to everybody's point, being intentional and figuring out how you clear space for that less structured engagement and interaction, I think is a bit of a sticky wicket that's tough for a lot of kind of non-native remote organizations still at this point.
And this reminds me of the way different people draw their energy in the workplace. I had a former CEO who rose up through the engineering ranks who said, when I have to interact with people all day long, which I have to do as a company leader, I'm frankly exhausted at the end of the day because I haven't had any think time. That's how I charge my batteries. I had the company CRO immediately following that say, I get isolated and weird if I'm not interacting with people all day long. And while none of us would probably choose the 12-hour Zoom schedule that Seth described earlier, I think it's super important to realize that, our employees, whether they're primarily introverted or extroverted, draw their energy and their creativity in exactly 180-degree opposite ways, and allowing room for them in the workplace to do those respective things, to bow out of the meeting, because guess what? That think time is like critical to my role. I just think we have to recognize that and be super flexible in supporting that. There's the trust thing that Darren brought up earlier that plays in there as well.
Phenomenal point. And I think it leads us maybe to our last question, to maybe orient around that notion of the individual. How do you keep people motivated and provide that intrinsic rewarding methodology that you really need, since we're kind of missing out on some of that maybe group appreciation when everyone is physically present?
Yeah, I'm not sure who said it earlier, but somebody mentioned the role of the leader and the differences in the skill sets that we need in our leaders as this environment changes. And I think this is a great example of the differences that we need to see expressed by our leaders. I think it is more important than ever to understand our teams as groups of individuals so that you can enable that motivation and that intrinsic reward. So to Rex's point, if if you've got folks on your team who are really drained by the calendar schedule, make sure you're reaching out and understanding what's giving them energy and taking it away. Make sure you understand how people like to be recognized and patted on the head. I'm one of those people who always tells my boss, look, I work for gold stars. So if you would just give me a gold star regularly, I feel really good, and I'm going to work really hard, and I'm going to take whatever tough hill you need me to take. But I need gold stars once in a while. And I'm really clear about that. Others, don't want recognition that is public in any way. So do you have recognition tools inside your organization that are more subdued and less flashy? Figure out what those things are and how people receive those best, what gives them the warm fuzzies, and then find the right mechanisms to do that. It might be, more time away from meetings. It might be more, or the exact opposite. It might be more public accolades for recognition of something accomplished. But it really, I'm not going to say taxes the leader, but it really calls on the leader to use different muscles than maybe they have been using in the past to understand the team as individuals and support them as individuals.
Yeah,
I totally agree, Kim.
Go ahead, Laura.
I was just going to say I take the exact same approach. And I think also what's really important is to give someone that purpose. What is the purpose that excites them? And then what is the short-term win? We all need wins, right? We could watch the news and have losses all day. But what is a short-term win we can give them with a sense of purpose? Within a couple of days, within a couple of weeks. And I try and drive people to, do innovation, do work, instead of trying to climb the mountain, chip at the boulder, and let's have something small and tangible that we won and we feel good about.
Great suggestion.
Yeah, love that. I think it begins and ends with 3 letters, ASK, ask. As Kim mentioned, everyone will answer this question differently. Surveys are definitely your best friend right now. And for managers, go into one-on-ones and just ask. Motivation to someone right now is going to look and feel very different. Everyone is in the same storm, but we're definitely in different boats, and people have different preferences on how they need to be motivated, and different jobs require different things in order to motivate them. But I would say ask. Your job as a leader goes from being a director to being an unblocker. You have to be willing and ready to accept a lot of feedback and then work to unblock that so that people can run as fast as they can and let that provide motivation. You have to make their lives easier. You have to ask, what is blocking you in this new environment? Maybe it's something that has nothing to do with work. So you're going to have to learn to be the chief therapy officer as well, on top of whatever your role is. There's a lot of things happening, a lot of variables right now that weren't even a figment of anyone's imagination a year ago. So ask and aim to make lives easier, and motivation can stem from that.
And I think it's also about recognizing the behaviors that we need to have in the future, right? We recognize this is a journey, and our starting point right now, wherever that may be, or starting point even before the pandemic, is different than where we're going to end up post-pandemic and beyond. So I think it's really critically important that when you have managers that are flexing those new muscles or strengthening the muscles that may have atrophied over time, it's critically important to recognize that so that we start building those better behaviors, and people see that and they aspire to demonstrate those same behaviors. So I think there's a little bit of an incentive alignment as well that we could be thinking through to kind of acknowledge and recognize those good behaviors.
Great, thank you, Ben. So we've heard from everybody on how you're dealing with the current challenges, how you're looking for opportunities to change, some best practices, some actions. I thought maybe to close this out in the last sort of 5 minutes, we can maybe go around the panel with a closing thought, a recommendation, or some type of actionable takeaway.
Sure, I can start.
So maybe I'll go first because I'm, yeah, please go ahead.
Go ahead.
Please.
If I could just say one thing, it would be, that you remember is that adaptability and resiliency are at the core of the future workforce. And the really good news is we're doing it now. So it's a call to action to, continuously improve on that. And let's get to the point where we can sense and respond changes in our environment and know that it's continuous change. Let's stay resilient and let's stay adaptable, even past the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Over to you, Ben.
Yeah, thank you. I was trying to get out of the way because the sun has beat me today in this view, but coming through my shutters here. But yeah, I think to me it's embrace the future. So if you think a year ago, would we have thought that 90+% of our working workforce is actually going to work from home? I think everyone would have laughed at me if I said that, right? So I think it's really believing the art of the possible. And leaving nothing to chance and putting everything on the table when we look at the solutions of the workforce of the future, and listen to your employees. They will guide you right, and it goes back to that humanity piece we mentioned earlier. So that's what I would say.
Using this unique moment in history to get better, to reinvest in people, to reinvest in enabling technologies is going to be the outcome. I'm very, very optimistic. The workplace will not look the same. Flex work, balance, adaptability to different personalities and different personas that we were just talking about, I think is going to be kind of a lasting outcome of this. So I'm actually quite optimistic that we'll emerge from this better than the point that we entered.
Kim, your thoughts?
I'll say inspiration is going to be key for leaders. Inspire your team members to think about what's beyond this. Inspire them to think about what could my life be like if these preconceived notions related to work weren't true anymore. What if I optimize my life for living? What would that look like? That is really the source of motivation. If you can inspire them to think about how they can live better lives, they will inevitably work better for the company that allows them to do that. It is definitely a privilege, and it's not lost on people, but it is on leaders to help facilitate that, because right now it's very difficult to see beyond the curve or the corner or whatever that may be. So do whatever you can to get people there, because that's where hope lies, and that's where the motivation is going to come from to get us through the middle.
Oh, that's great, Darren. So my call to action would be sort of two double-sided. One is to the individuals, to the individuals out there, dig deep, right? Figure out what's important to you. To Darren's point, figure out how to craft your life so that it is your life and it includes the components that you need to make your life fit the definition of your definition of success. I think that's really important. Now is the time to come off of autopilot and out of the rut or the groove that many of us fall into over time, and really take the opportunity to examine what's important for us and how do we move forward. What is our purpose? What is our North Star? And then the call to action on the employer side is exactly something. I think Rex said it. It's enabling technologies. Figure out what your people need and then get it to them. Whether that's data, whether that's outputs of analytics, whether that's specific tools, whether that's learnings on how to use specific tools. Figure out what your people need and create the infrastructure and the environment so that they have the things they need and know how to use them so that they can thrive. So I think for both sides of that coin, it's, be intentional and maybe time to shed some things that we had held maybe too dear for too long.
Thank you, Kim. That's a fantastic closure. And so with that, I really would like to thank the panelists. This has been incredibly enlightening for me. I hope it has been for all of our participants. So Darren, Kim, Laura, Rex, Ben, thank you very much. I know that we've emerged with a few themes here around technology and risk and culture, but the sort of the orienting theme, that to me had maybe the most gravity was really around our people. And how are we ensuring that our people have everything that they need in order to be successful and collaborative and healthy and really to be shining stars. So thanks for everybody here. This has been great, and I think that